Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Happy to have you. Thank you, sir. Glad to see you. Mr. Krause, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the three of you this morning. Thank you for being here. The presumption that I and many people have had going through this session has been that while the Tea Party still has a lot of power in Texas, Tea Party still has a lot of power nationally, just in terms of execution, in terms of legislative accomplishments, this has not been a particularly good session for Tea Party issues and Tea Party values. Mr. Krause, would you agree with that?
Well, I know one of the issues that's most important to me are pro-life issues.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen any action on pro-life issues
Fetal
on the
pain
House
bill,
floor.
is the fetal pain bill going to make it or not?
It does not look like it on the House side.
Yeah.
And it's not only fetal pain, which I think is a very important piece of legislation. I would have loved to have seen that at least debated on the House floor.
Right.
But the fact that we have not had any pro-life bill debated on the House floor is pretty egregious to me, considering so many people in the Republican Party and the Republican platform puts that as a huge issue, and we have 95 Republicans in the House.
Why hasn't that happened, Mr. Krause?
That's a great question. I'm a freshman, so I'm still learning how things work.
Right.
I don't know how you can pinpoint one thing or another. All I know is that we have not had that debate on the floor, and I think it's a critical shame.
Mr. Toth, good or bad session for the Tea Party?
It's been underwhelming.
Underwhelming.
And I'll be more blunt than Matt. It's a lack of leadership.
On whose part?
On the leadership of the Republican Party at all levels. There are 95 Republicans and 55 Democrats, and we can't get pro-life legislation through this House. We can't even get it debated on the floor. We can't even get it out of committee.
Is it just the fetal pain bill, or are there other pieces of legislation on this issue that you feel have been stalled unfairly?
It's all across the board. At some point, the question is probably going to come up, you know, what are you most surprised of?
Yeah. It's right here, in fact, right?
It's the question, for me it would be how often the word however is used. I'm against expansive government. However, we need to tell schools they need to do this. I'm against licensing and fees. However,
Right.
we need to tell driveway contractors that they need to be licensed.
Right.
I'm against taxes. However, we need to implement this fee and that tax.
Right.
And that is why we struggle
Right.
in these sessions to balance a budget, when if we just held true
Yeah.
to the things the Texas Constitution asks us to do and be about,
Yeah.
we wouldn't have any problems.
Mr. Toth, you promised bluntness. Let me hold you to that promise. Is the problem the Speaker? Is the problem the Governor? When you say leadership, I assume you don't mean Steve Munisteri. Who are you talking about?
It's the group needs to come together. Those that are tasked with the Senate, the House, and the executive branch need to come together, and they need to talk, and they need to work together.
Yeah.
And if they're truly about a conservative, and I don't like to use the word conservative, I like to use the word federalist,
Yeah.
cause, then Texas, as good as we are, we can be a lot better.
Mr. Stickland, I can do enough math to understand the 95-55 split in the House. But the reality is that 95 is not 95 of like mind. We've already seen quite a lot of Republicans versus Republicans in this session. And in fact, you may be the poster child for that. I've seen you in the middle of enough fights that I wanted to get the ref to stop it, actually, a couple different times. Right. Whether it was on the budget or just yesterday when you and Larry Gonzalez had the equivalent of a slap fight on the floor of the House. Mr. Toth and Mr. Krause are basically calling out their colleagues and saying that there's not enough commitment to conservative principles within the Republican Party. You agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people want to place blame, and I'll be honest with you, it's kind of hard to do that right now. We've got a lot of moving pieces.
Why is it hard to place blame, Mr. Stone?
Well, because, you know, there's a lot of different ways to kill legislation is one of the things that we're working on.
Right. For instance, are you going to talk for 10 minutes so this event ends? Is that what happened?
I have a lot of questions.
You do have a lot of questions. Okay, good. Yeah. But in fact, procedurally, there are lots of ways to kill legislation, and you demonstrated yesterday that the power of one freshman is actually quite a bit greater than a lot of people assume.
If you're willing to stand up and do it.
Right. Yes. So, but you say that there's a lot of time left. You don't want to necessarily go there, but go there for the benefit of this audience. If you believe that your fellow Republicans are insufficient to the task, say so. Tell us who specifically has been keeping the Tea Party view of the world down.
Well, it's hard to name names specifically, but I think you've got to look at people where they are in the process, whether you know, certain chairmen, people who are in charge of, you know, it can even get down to staff. You know, we've had some bills go down because of staff errors.
Yeah.
In the House. So it's very hard to pinpoint and blame anyone specifically right now. But We should probably talk about that again in a couple of weeks once we have the full picture.
Mr. Krause, you talked about the pro-life issues, and of course I'm reminded that the governor during his State of the State address did not mention the fetal pain bill, did not make that an emergency item. I don't believe he even uttered the word abortion in the State of the State address. In previous sessions, and specifically in the last session, that one issue, among others, was quite front and center. So is the governor really the problem here, starting off the session as he did without establishing that that was going to be a flag in the ground?
I may be wrong. I thought he did mention fetal pain in the State of the State. So I think he may have, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
But if he didn't, I think that's something that from past experiences near and dear to his heart. I wish he had put that in the State of the State if he did not.
Yeah.
But I know we've been in talks with the governor's office recently, and he very much wants to see pro-life legislation move. And so I think the executive branch is going to come in and help out on that and hopefully push us in the last 20 days or so to get something done.
Of course, when he said yesterday, Mr. Krause, that he was threatening a special session if certain bits of legislation didn't get through, he talked about tax cuts, he talked about funding the water plan, didn't talk about fetal pain or pro-life legislation.
Right, and I don't know if he would bring us back for a special session for pro-life. You'd have to ask him specifically, but.
Right. Mr. Krause and Mr. Toth, you both ran against incumbent Republicans, defeated them in the primary last time. In theory, you found them wanting, but you also had an affirmative reason for running. You wanted to accomplish something. Mr. Toth, what made you run? This was your, a very successful run. I think not a lot of people went into that primary expecting that Mr. Eisler was as vulnerable as you apparently did.
Right.
And in theory, you had something you wanted to accomplish. What was it?
Probably a year before I decided to run, I said to my wife one day, I said, I am just sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm being angry at everyone else that the United States and Texas is not heading in the right direction, and decided to run. And I want to see Texas. I want to see Texas be the sovereign state that its founders had intended for her to be. America is strongest when the states are sovereign. The federal government was created for the states. It's not the other way around. And when the states are sovereign and independent, America is at its greatest. And that means that we've got to be statesmen when we come here instead of politicians that are just willing to cut deals to bring stuff back to the district.
So was the 10th Amendment portfolio of issues, state versus the federal government, was important for you?
It's the whole plethora of the Constitution. It's
Yeah.
not just 10th Amendment and leave us alone. It's the state saying, federal government, we're going to leave you alone. We're not going to keep going to the trough and asking for anything and everything.
Right.
If you look at...
I guess I shouldn't ask you if we should expand Medicaid then.
Sure.
Okay, good.
I'd love to have that debate.
All right, good, yeah. I think asked and answered. But the point here is you were concerned about the status of Texas relative to the federal government, status of all states as sovereign state. That was your big concern going in.
It's one of them. It's one of many.
Mr. Krause, you ran against Ms. Nash, beat her. Tell me why you did that. What motivated you to run to begin with?
Well, we saw 101 Republicans in the House last time.
Right.
And one of the things that was frustrating to me is I felt they passed a budget that included the shell game, some of the budgetary gimmicks that we deride Washington, D.C. for. And I thought, I've got 3 young kids, and I think Texas has been a leader in the nation for years, and I want to make sure it stays that way for when they get older and when they're proud Texans.
So even a House with 101 Republicans, Mr. Krause, was not true enough to conservative principles on things like the budget from your standpoint?
Well, on the budget, I mean, they did some great things. Sonogram legislation, going back to the pro-life, is one thing. So they did some very good things. There were some things I thought were lacking.
Right.
And so I thought I could hopefully come down to Austin and be a part of the conversation to not only get some things done, but hopefully start the conversation to truly limit the size and scope of government to where it's doing exactly what it needs to be doing and nothing more.
Right. Mr. Stickland, your goals going into this session were what? You didn't defeat an incumbent, but obviously you came in thinking that there were things you wanted to do.
My number one goal is to come here and cut spending.
Right.
I think we were in a unique opportunity last session with some of the budget shortfalls to make some cuts that needed to happen.
Right.
And with the economy starting to pick back up and the extra money on the table now, I was hoping to come here and hold the line and continue to make cuts.
Yeah.
That was my number one goal.
And so let's talk about how that's gone so far. You know, you have a budget that obviously more money being spent on certain programs that were cut last session. In the minds of many people in the building, I think both Democrats and Republicans, maybe not as much money as people would like. You know, there are still people saying they'd like more money for this or more money for that. Mr. Stickland, do you think that the House has produced a conservative enough budget to your taste?
Absolutely not at this point.
Tell me some of the ways in which the House budget is insufficiently conservative.
Well, the problem with the budget right now, as I see it, Evan, is we have got a serious priority problem. A lot of folks came in here and wanted to talk about what is the proper role of government water infrastructure, roads, things of that nature.
Right.
And rather than funding those at the start of the budget, we filled it with all of the programs that aren't as necessary. And so now we're running around trying to scramble, trying to figure out how we can do this stuff, when we should have said, if this is really as important as we say it is, this should be number one, the first thing that we fill. And that's why we're in the trouble that we are now.
So I know you got up on the floor along with many of your fellow freshman Republicans during the budget debate and talked about specific programs that you wanted to see defunded and have that money moved over to, on that day, the focus was the teacher retirement system.
Right.
I think incentives for Hollywood, I think, was one example I could think of. There was a program that was to attract and retain teachers in the Valley. I think you and Representative Lucio kind of got into it over that on the day of the budget debate. Tell me some other things that you think in the budget. If you ran the world, Mr. Stickland, what would you be zeroing out of the budget first in order to do the things that you want?
I think we've got a lot of things that have to do with, like the feral hog abatement program was one that we saw. The Texas Clean School Bus program. We filed 8 different amendments on the budget to take stuff out. I mean, you could really have a heyday. When we went through the budget and just looking at the programs and what they did, we came up with over a page in 3 different columns.
How much money would those programs, if you took them all together, how much would that get you back? Do you know?
I couldn't give you that total.
Because it seemed to me, Mr. Stickland,
It was nearly $750 million.
It seemed to me, Mr. Stickland, one of the criticisms, not just from Democrats but from Republicans on the day of the budget debate, when many of you were kind of in the line of fire, was that the programs you're talking about defunding don't amount to very much money. You're basically, why are you quibbling with this nickels and dimes?
It was more than just that, though.
Yeah.
It was sending a message of, this is what's important to us, and this is not as important.
Right.
And Evan, that was an unfortunate situation. A lot of politics got involved with that fight, specifically with the retired TRS care program.
Yeah.
When I messaged back to my district and sent out emails to my constituents and said, we think that taking care of retired teachers is more important than these things over here, I did not have one person trying to argue that with me.
Right.
The people back at home understood it.
Yeah.
And then we came down here to Austin.
Yeah.
With kind of more insider game, if you will, and people are like, oh, no, you can't do that. The Retired Teachers Association even came out in opposition to what we were trying to do.
Right, even they opposed your plan.
Right.
Which was a purely political play by them.
Mr. Toth, do you agree with Mr. Stickland that there are programs in the budget that can be cut? I feel confident that you do. Tell me some of the programs that in a Toth budget would disappear in favor of some of the priorities you think need to be funded.
It's a priority thing, as Jonathan and Matt have been alluding to. I do believe water's critically important.
Right.
And all of us do. Our thing is, if this is the most important thing that's to come out of the 83rd session, then why aren't we paying for it up front? With a week to go in the appropriations process, an additional $800 million on the House side, or is it $1 billion, was added to education.
Right.
Not to water, but to education.
Supporters of education, Mr. Toth, would say, I'm just trying to tell you what I think they would say,
But let's talk about education
between
for a second.
4 and 5.4 billion, depending upon how you calculate
and
it,
the
was cut
foundation
last session.
school
They wanted
funding,
to restore some of
right,
those
in the
funds.
foundation school funding programs, there's this thing called the CEI, the Cost of Education Index.
Yeah.
I'm a Conroe Independent School District.
Right.
We pay our teachers really well. For someone in West Texas, though, they don't have the tax base that we have in Conroe.
Right.
And so they're going to pay their teachers considerably less. The Cost of Education Index gives them more money to be able to pay teachers. There's $5 billion sitting right now in ISD coffers around the state of Texas that should be, and according to Texas law and the way that Cost of Education Index is funded, that is supposed to be for classroom teachers, but it's going towards iPads and gymnasiums and jumbotrons and all these other things. But it's not going into the classroom All of us passionately believe that if you want great education, you've got to fund it, and it has to happen with the teachers.
Yeah. So your view is there's money available for education that is being diverted to other things
Absolutely.
right
I
now.
mean,
And
Fort
before
Bend
we put
Independent-
money in the budget, we need to go after
Fort
that.
Bend Independent School District, they made such a big deal out of the 82nd session that if we don't have more money, we're going to have to lay off 284 teachers.
Yeah.
They didn't get more money. How many teachers did they lay off? None. And then 6 months later, they went and bought iPads for K through 8th graders, $18 million, and it was almost like a finger in the eye of the
Of
taxpayers.
course, they might argue, Mr. Toth, that that's part of the use of technology to advance the cause of curriculum and learning and all that sort of stuff.
Let's prioritize. If you're a good business person, you're going to start with the most important thing in the budget.
Right.
For education, it's our teachers.
Right. So you know, Mr. Toth, that the House budget restored somewhere in that neighborhood of $2.5 billion to $3 billion in funding on public education, given the cuts in the last session. Would you have not restored that funding?
We needed to put more money in education. We're not debating that, but we are. But that said, I still think we're overfunding it right now.
Right.
We need to put more in, but I think we've put too much in. I agree with the governor on that.
Yeah.
But a message needs to go back to the ISDs that prioritization is imperative of other people's money.
Right.
My district is an example on the CEI index. We're one of 1,000 districts across the state of Texas.
Right.
There are maybe a dozen that spend all the CEI money in the classroom. Conroe Independent School District is one of them. And that's crazy that the other 900 plus districts have their priorities so completely out of whack.
Right.
If we're going to send money to the districts, there needs to be one string and only one string, and that is there needs to be prioritization about how the money's
Go in
spent.
the classroom. Mr. Krause, I'll come to you in a second, Mr. Stickland. Mr. Krause, Mr. Toth says that we are overfunding public education. Do you agree?
Well, I think that's the key question.
Oh, it is. That's why I asked it.
Yeah. What
do you
is-
think?
What is overfunding? What is underfunding? What is the perfect amount we need to spend for education? And I never get a firm answer on that. I'll ask people, okay, if you tell me what amount of money you need to guarantee that all of our students will succeed. 5.4 was cut out of the budget last time. I say if we restored all that 5.4 billion, gave you 5.4 billion more, do you think that is sufficient? I never get an answer one way or the other. So I don't know if you can ever say we're overfunding, we're underfunding. We have to look at the results that our money is getting. And again, it goes back to priorities. I think if you really feel that we are underfunding education, make that the cornerstone of the
Right.
budget along with the other things.
Start there.
Start there. And I think Mitt Romney had a great question in one of the presidential debates. He said, if I take office, the question I'll ask myself every time is this worth going into debt with China over? And I think what we need to ask ourselves as Texans when we look at government programs, is this worth indebting our children or not taking care of education or water with this certain program or this certain agency?
Well, I'll come back to water in a second. Mr. Stickland, you wanted in on this conversation about education.
Well, I was going to say, you know, it's not always about the dollar amount, too. We're doing a lot of things like HB 5, where we're reducing the testing and taking burdens off. Representative Isaac had HB 300, which could restore local control to the school districts
Yep.
and free up that money. I talked to my school district, which I believe is one of the best in the state, HEB ISD. And they stretch their dollars very effectively up there.
Right.
I believe that if you pull those mandates off, that dollar can go further.
So are you opposed to the level of funding that's gone back into the budget on public ed, as Mr.
Without
Toth
funding
apparently
water
is?
and transportation,
So
absolutely.
you would have made those things the first priority?
Absolutely.
Right. Mr. Krause, you wrote a column for the Tribune, actually, opposing use of the rainy day funds money to set up this revolving loan fund for the water program. This is, of course, the issue that is very much at play right now. How are we going to fund the water plant? You are against your governor on this question. Tell us why you think there's a better way, and what is that better way?
Again, I think it goes back to priorities. From what I understand, from last biennium to this biennium, we have about $19 billion more that we've spent in our budget.
Right.
It seems like we could have found $2 billion in that $19 billion to fund water. We wouldn't even be talking about that.
But you'd have to cut it from someplace else, so tell me where you cut it from.
Well, again, I don't know specifically what you could cut, what you could take out. One of the things that was big for me in the budget talk was looking at areas where we're duplicating or replicating certain state agencies, and our office was looking at that. So I don't know exactly what the formula or which program you could say definitively we would cut this, this, and this to get the $2 billion.
Right.
But I know if you start with the base and have that $2 billion put in, then certain programs are just not going to get funded.
So at this point now, unless they go back in and cut $2 billion from elsewhere in the budget to fund a water plan, you would continue to be a no vote on taking money out of the rainy day fund.
That's correct. And one of the biggest problems, I think, for a lot of us is that if you did take that $2 billion based on ruling by the LBB, you would be breaking the spending cap. And I know we've talked a lot about what Washington, D.C. does with the debt ceiling and things like that. They say, oh, they're just breaking the debt ceiling. They don't have any fiscal responsibility.
Right.
I think it'd be disingenuous for Texas to do the exact same thing and then try to claim it's conservative because we're using it for a governmental purpose.
Mr. Stickland, given how much money is in the rainy day fund, the improving health of the Texas economy, in particular the shale boom, which is providing a lot of revenue for the state that we didn't have as recently as the last session, given the fact that even the governor, upholder of conservative principles, has moved his position from 2011 to 2013 on the question of whether it's appropriate to use the rainy day fund. You will not go there? You will not support
go there.
under any circumstances? There's no
think we need
trade-off that you'd be willing to entertain. Say $1.8 billion for tax cuts and then take money out of the rainy day fund. That might be an acceptable compromise to bust the spending cap. Anything at all that
Reagan did that once. He cut a deal for tax cuts.
Right.
And
So now we don't like Reagan?
no, I'm just saying we need
Yeah.
to be we need to be sure of the decisions that we make.
So no
And, you know,
rainy day fund. No rainy day fund.
No, and there's a lot more to it. Number one, that was a campaign promise that I believe my constituents related to very well.
And they expect you
said-
to honor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's my intention.
Right.
Number two, you and I both know oil and gas is looking very good right now.
It
But I
is.
could give you 150 reasons as someone who is in the industry that could stop on a dime tomorrow.
Right.
Okay? And we're talking about a fund that if things go really, really wrong,
Right.
that's what we've got. And I'm not willing to take it down to next to nothing. I've also seen numbers that said, you know, it could put our bond status into question if we take it down too low.
Right.
And
The governor is for this. He doesn't seem to be as concerned about the threats to the bond status as some are. That doesn't move you.
Well, I haven't gotten to completely convince him that he's wrong yet.
You're going to. Okay, we'll be sure to. Well, I'd like video of that conversation between you and the governor. Mr. Toth, are you also likewise opposed to taking money out of the rainy day fund?
I am. We've got the money. We can do this. It's about priorities. If we had cut 2% across the whole budget, just 2%,
Yeah.
it would have paid for water.
Right.
And we still would have been spending billions more
Right.
across the board
Right.
on everything.
Right.
So there's no reason why we couldn't
So
do
very,
this.
very quickly, yes or no to each of you. So if the conferees come back with a budget that involves use of the rainy day fund in the way that we're talking about, you will be no votes on the overall budget. That's not the fact that it might be baked into a budget that has many things in it that you like. You will be a no vote on the budget ultimately if that's the way it goes.
It's going to be a cold, lonely summer in Austin, and we're going to be here.
So you're a no vote on the budget at that point.
At this point,
You're
I
a no
am.
vote on the budget at that point.
Correct.
You're a no vote on the budget at
Yeah,
that
I
point.
do not support using rainy day
Absolutely.
funds.
Mr. Toth, the president's in town. We ought to talk about the relationship between the federal government and the state a little bit more. You moved gun legislation this session. I want to characterize this accurately. That would say that if there are federal gun restrictions in place, not that it appears there are going to be any anytime soon, but if there were in place, the state would basically no longer be obligated or not be obligated to have to enforce those. That the state law enforcement would not be obligated to have to enforce those. Is that correct?
You get to ask me any question, I get to give you any answer.
Yeah.
So let me frame it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
There's this thing called the Second Amendment, and it's the only amendment in the whole Constitution that says shall not be infringed.
Yeah.
And so we worked with the Attorney General on this to make sure that we crafted legislation that protects Texans' Second Amendment right to bear arms.
Right.
Because if we lose the fundamental amendment within the Constitution that gives freedom and breadth to every other amendment, then we'll lose our sovereignty. So the whole premise of House Bill 1076 is that it calls for state officials and county officials to protect and preserve and defend the Constitution that our sheriffs swore to protect and defend. And where my legislation came out of, and I'm sure Matt's is the same thing,
Right.
my sheriff, Tommy Gage, within 1 week of the president saying we were going to infringe on everyone's Second Amendment rights, my sheriff came out and said, hey, here's the deal. We're not going to do this. We're not going to have anything to do with it.
I think in fairness, what the president didn't say we're going to infringe on everyone's Second Amendment rights. I think he expressly said we're not going to infringe. We're going to put restrictions in place
When you put
that would still
restrictions-
allow lawful gun owners to
When you
own
put
guns.
restrictions
Yeah.
on the type of weapons that he's talking about, then you're infringing on Second Amendment rights.
Do you worry, Mr. Toth, that it would not be constitutional or in any other way appropriate for the state to decide one day there's a particular federal law that we don't want to uphold, so we're just going to basically refuse to uphold it?
Well, my bill is not the Wyoming bill, which it's called the Firearms Protection Act, but it's not the Wyoming bill,
Right.
which basically says you can arrest federal officials for enforcing federal law.
You're not going there.
We're not going. It'd be great if you know, wonderful, sounds great. It's great. It's red meat for a lot of people, but according to the Attorney General, it won't pass muster moving up through the courts.
But the bill that you've put together would. He believes it would.
It would.
Right.
We've gone down a different path.
Mr. Krause, you have a different bill, but it attempts to achieve similar ends, which is pushing back against the federal government.
Right. In the wake of the Newtown shootings, the
Yeah.
Aurora shootings, that's right. That's when we filed the bill, and the president was making his remarks in the
Right.
Rose Garden. We wanted to find some way that Texas could confidently assert that we're going to continue to frame the gun debate on our own terms.
Right.
And so we're looking for ways to do that. And we came across, thanks to Mario Loyal at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, turned us onto a case, Prince versus United States, 1997, where the majority opinion said the federal government cannot compel the states to enforce its laws for them. And so we thought that was a novel framework to go about the issue, to say, federal government, we understand and recognize that you have the ability to enforce and enact gun regulations. However, we're not going to use state resources, state time, or state dollars to help you do that. So you can come into our state, do it if you want to. And so that sets up a very constitutionally sound framework for which we say we're not going to use state resources to infringe on Second Amendment rights, but you can if you want to.
Let me quickly ask you, before we go to questions, about 2014 and 2016 from the Tea Party perspective. Mr. Stickland, we're going to have some competitive races, it appears, in 2014, and I wonder where the Tea Party goes in the context of competitive Republican races. Do you believe
Texas,
in
in
Texas?
House
Let's
races?
start here in Texas. Well, I'm looking at really statewide elected officials. We don't yet know. We may know in a couple of weeks whether we're going to have a competitive race for governor. Let's just put that to the side for a second. But we appear to have a competitive race for lieutenant governor shaping up, with the incumbent, Mr. Dewhurst, saying he's sure he's going to run. Mr. Staples was here last week. He's going to run. Mr. Patterson is going to run. We may have others get in that race. You recall during the Senate race, Ted Cruz, basically his entire campaign was David Dewhurst is insufficiently conservative. Do you buy, Mr. Stickland, that line of argument about the lieutenant governor? And would you today endorse a candidate other than the lieutenant governor as a proud member of the Tea Party in that race?
You next go on that one, did you?
What did you think I was going to ask? Are you going to endorse the lieutenant governor against Mr. Staples or Mr. Patterson?
Would you believe me if I told you that I've had 2, maybe 1-minute conversations with the lieutenant governor at this point?
But Mr. Stickland, obviously you pay attention. You know what happened in that Senate race. Do you believe Mr. Cruz's argument about the lieutenant governor was adequate? And do you think that there's going to be a Tea Party insurrection
I think what Ted
against the
Cruz-
lieutenant governor?
I think what Ted Cruz ran his campaign on is what resonated with the grassroots of Texas.
Right.
I think it changed Texas politics for a very long time, what he
Right.
was able to accomplish.
But you don't want to offer a point of view about whether that race in particular, as an emblem of what's going to happen in the next election cycle, is where the Tea Party will go after an incumbent.
I think that anybody that's wanting to run statewide, whether they're an incumbent or a challenger, needs to understand that the grassroots in Texas are very mobilized.
Yeah.
They are still connected. They are watching. I've been amazed by
Yeah.
how many people back at home, like yesterday when we had the situation on the floor that happened, I must have gotten 20 phone calls and texts within 15 minutes of people who are watching
Right.
the live
So
house
people are
feed.
engaged.
Absolutely.
Right.
And, whether it's Governor Dewhurst or anybody else, they need to know that everybody is watching very closely.
They're on notice, is the
And
point.
yes, and these next couple of weeks are going to be crucial.
Mr.
for all of
Toth,
them.
with the bluntness that you promised, do you have a point of view about either that race or any of the races next time in terms of the Tea Party and incumbents?
I mean, it's armchair quarterbacking, and it's,
Yes, but
hindsight's-
that's the most fun kind.
It is. Hindsight's 20/20. It's easy to say this, but gee, Ted Cruz ran a really good campaign, and,
Right.
and the lieutenant governor did not. And one of the big strategic errors I think that the lieutenant governor made early on in this thing was sidestepping all of these debates that went on in small towns across Texas,
Yeah.
Tea Party
Many of them
debates.
Tea Party
He didn't
debates,
go to any of them.
Right.
And thought that the Tea Party did not matter. And the problem is that people think that they can pigeonhole what the Tea Party is.
Yep.
The best thing about the Tea Party is the worst thing about it is it's wildly disorganized.
It's a loose movement. It's a loosely organized movement, but it's not one thing.
It's not an institution, it's a movement, which means there are thousands of little Tea Parties all over the state of Texas that all have different priorities. But one thing that we all hold dear, whether you're a disenfranchised Democrat or a disenfranchised Republican, is that we want less of Washington and we want less of Austin.
So you're not prepared to come out and be specific about any one candidate. It's more the general idea, per Mr. Stickland's point, that any candidate running incumbent or challenger is on notice that this is
Right.
an obligation of candidacy. is
Yeah,
that
I'm
you
not
Right,
trying to be elusive at this point. I just
right. Mr. Krause, the Staples campaign, I think, was hoping for an endorsement this morning. You don't want to offer a specific point of view about that race?
Well, I heartily offer them Steve Toth's endorsement.
You
I
do?
have no problem doing that. Yeah.
You're
Well,
sounding more like a politician every day.
You would notice I was a Ted Cruz supporter from the very beginning. I supported him. I endorsed him from the very beginning.
Right.
And that's because I'd gotten to know him when he was Solicitor General, came away from a meeting with him, incredibly impressed, told my wife, if he ever runs for anything, I'll support him.
Right.
So that's how I was able to get, as opposed to the lieutenant governor, it was okay for me. I knew that I was going to support Ted Cruz.
Right.
With Commissioner Patterson, Commissioner Staples, I don't know them as well.
So the point is, in general sense, going into 2014, you're going to be looking for similar kinds of candidates to then Solicitor General Cruz.
Absolutely.
Whether it's an incumbent or a challenger, they're going to have to uphold Tea Party principles to get your vote.
Right. And I have made one endorsement for Land Commissioner, George P. Bush. I've gotten to know him.
Is anybody else running?
No, which makes it easy.
That's very
great.
brave of you, Mr. Krause.
But I'm just saying, and he's another
We don't
guy I've
know
gotten to know and appreciate his principles and values.
Yeah.
And so if there's somebody out there that I know that I'm comfortable with, I don't mind endorsing him at this point.
Right.
In that race, there's nobody there
Okay,
yet.
so 2016 presidential race, Cruz and Perry both run. Cruz or Perry?
Cruz or Perry?
Cruz or Perry, both running for president. Cruz or Perry?
Oh my gosh. J.C. Watts.
Cruz or Perry?
Cruz.
Cruz or Perry?
Cruz is one of the most impressive guys I've ever been around. I like the governor, but Ted Cruz is a rising star, and I like him.
Can I add something to
You
that,
may.
though? I'm still able to be had by Perry, depending on how this session goes.
Are you?
Yes,
You got to see how things end up.
got to see how things end up.
Okay, very good. Let's give these guys a hand. Thank you very much for your time and your good sportsmanship on this.